In 1891, two of the most senior detectives at Scotland Yard sat down separately and wrote the same name. The man they both believed was Jack the Ripper. They never arrested him. They never named him in public. They watched him walk into an asylum and die there, and they took the secret to their graves. This is the story of the man Scotland Yard knew did it, and of how the most famous unsolved murder in history was never really unsolved at all. In the autumn of 1888, the East End of London was hell with gas lamps. Whitechapel, 1 square mile, 900,000 people, most of them refugees, Irish fleeing famine, Jews fleeing Russian pogroms, Polish, Lithuanian, German. They lived 8 to a room in tenements that leaked sewage from the floor above. A bed for the night cost 4 pennies. If you didn't have 4 pennies, you walked the streets until dawn. You drank gin to stay warm. You sold what you had. Mary Ann Nichols had nothing left to sell except herself. She was 43, a mother of 5 who had walked out on her husband, or been walked out on, the records disagree. On the night of August 31st, the deputy at her lodging house turned her into the street because she was 3 pence short. She wasn't upset. She laughed. She told him not to worry, she had a jolly new bonnet, and she'd be back with the money soon. 3 hours later, a cart driver in Bucks Row stepped on something soft in the dark. He thought it was a tarpaulin. It was Mary Ann. Her throat had been cut so deep her head was nearly off. Her abdomen had been opened from breastbone to groin. The killer had done it in under 5 minutes in an open street with constables passing the end of the road every 15. 8 days later, Annie Chapman, 47, dying of tuberculosis, 3 pence to her name, turned out for the same reason. By 6 the next morning, a market porter found her in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, throat cut, abdomen open, intestines lifted out and laid across her right shoulder, neatly, the way a butcher drapes a cut of meat. Her uterus had been removed and taken away. The doctor who examined her said something that changed the case. He said whoever had done this knew anatomy. The cuts were too clean, the organ removal was too precise. You could not do this in the dark in 2 minutes with a knife the size of a hand unless you had cut up bodies before. The press grabbed the word and ran with it. The killer was a doctor. The killer was a surgeon. The killer was, terrifyingly, one of them. The newspapers needed a name. They had been calling him Leather Apron, after a Jewish bootmaker the mob had nearly lynched. Leather Apron was in a cell when the next murders happened. The press needed something better. On September 27th, the Central News Agency opened a letter written in red ink in a steady, almost performing hand. Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me but they won't fix me just yet. I love my work and want to start again. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. 3 days after that letter was published, he killed 2 women in one night. It is called the double event, less than an hour apart, less than a mile apart. The first was Elizabeth Stride, a Swedish immigrant who told people she had survived the Princess Alice shipwreck on the Thames, the disaster that killed 700 people in 1878. She was found in Dutfield's yard with her throat cut, her body untouched. The killer had been interrupted. A pony cart had turned into the yard, and the animal had refused to move forward. It had smelled something in the dark. The driver shouted. The killer slipped through a side passage and vanished. He did not go home. 45 minutes later, and 3/4 of a mile west, in Mitre Square, a beat constable on a 15-minute rotation came around a corner and walked into a body. Catherine Eddowes had been killed and dissected in under 10 minutes. Her face had been cut open in patterns, 2 inverted V's on her cheeks. Her left kidney had been removed and taken. Part of her uterus was gone. She had been pulled apart in a public square in the time it takes to boil an egg. And then he did something he had never done before. He walked away through streets crawling with police, and on the wall of a doorway on Goulston Street he stopped, took a piece of Catherine Eddowes' bloodied apron from his pocket, and dropped it on the ground. Above it, in chalk, he wrote a sentence. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. When the police commissioner himself, Sir Charles Warren, was woken up and brought to the wall, he made a decision that historians have argued about for 137 years. He ordered the writing scrubbed off the bricks before it could be photographed. He was afraid of an anti-Jewish pogrom in the East End. We do not have a single photograph of the only sentence Jack the Ripper may have ever written by hand. 2 weeks later, a small cardboard box arrived at the offices of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. Inside, in wine, was half a human kidney. The note attached was 3 lines. From hell, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, prasarved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. Catherine Eddowes had been missing her left kidney. This is the letter most modern historians believe was real. The Dear Boss letter is now thought to be a journalist's invention. The kidney was not. And then, on November 9th, the killer did the thing that finally broke London. Mary Jane Kelly was 25. She was Irish. She sang folk songs in her room. She was, by every account, the most beautiful woman in Whitechapel. She had her own room, 1 room, ground floor, 13 Miller's Court, and she owed 6 weeks of rent. On the morning of the 9th, the landlord sent his man Thomas Bowyer to collect what he could. Bowyer knocked. No answer. He reached through a broken pane of glass, pushed aside a coat that served as a curtain, and looked into the room. He never recovered. He gave testimony at the inquest and then disappeared from the historical record. What he saw is in the police photographs, the first crime scene photographs ever taken in a murder investigation. Mary Jane Kelly had been dismantled. Her face had been cut from her skull. Her organs had been arranged around the bed like place settings. Pieces of her had been laid out on the bedside table. The fire in the grate had been built up so high it had melted the solder on the kettle. The killer had needed light to work by. He had been alone with her body for hours. Her heart was missing. It was never found. She was the last canonical victim. After Miller's Court, the murders stopped. Not slowed, stopped. And killers like this do not stop. They escalate. They get caught. They die. Whoever Jack the Ripper was, something happened to him in the weeks after Mary Jane Kelly, something that took him out of the streets of Whitechapel forever. So who was he? The Metropolitan Police narrowed their investigation, eventually, to 3 names. The list is called the Macnaghten Memorandum, written in 1894 by the Chief Constable of the CID. 3 suspects: Droot, Ostrog, Kosminski. Montague Droot was a barrister and schoolmaster whose body was pulled from the Thames in December 1888, his pockets weighted with stones. The timing is suspicious. The man was not. Droot was a cricketer and a tutor with no record of violence and no surgical training. He killed himself, the suicide note says, because he was afraid he was going mad like his mother. Michael Ostrog was a Russian con man and thief. He had been in a French asylum during at least 2 of the murders. He was on the list because he was foreign, mentally ill, and unaccounted for. He almost certainly did not do it. That leaves the 3rd name, Aaron Kosminski. Kosminski was a Polish-Jewish barber, 23 years old in 1888, living with his sister and brother-in-law on Greenfield Street, 3 streets from the murder of Mary Ann Nichols. He was severely mentally ill. He suffered from auditory hallucinations. He believed he was being controlled by an instinct that told him what to do. He refused to eat food prepared by other human beings. He ate scraps from gutters because he believed the rest of the world was contaminated. He was committed to Colney Hatch Asylum in February 1891, 15 months after Mary Jane Kelly. He spent the rest of his life institutionalized and died of gangrene in 1919. And here is the part the documentaries leave out. In late 1890 or early 1891, the records are deliberately vague. The Metropolitan Police took Kosminski, in secret, to a convalescent home for retired police officers in Brighton. They had a witness with them, a Jewish witness who had seen a man standing with one of the victims minutes before her death. The witness looked at Kosminski. He identified him on the spot. And then he refused to testify. The witness, historians believe it was Joseph Laund, who had seen Catherine Eddowes alive 10 minutes before she was killed, would not stand up in a Christian court and put a fellow Jew on the gallows. He gave the police the answer. And then he closed his mouth and would not open it again. 2 of the most senior detectives on the case wrote about this identification, separately, after their retirement. Sir Robert Anderson, the assistant commissioner in his memoirs in 1910, he said the Ripper was a Polish Jew, that he had been identified, and that no other person ever was a possible suspect in the case. Donald Swanson, the chief inspector who personally ran the investigation, wrote it in pencil in the margins of his copy of Anderson's book. 3 lines. The suspect's name. Kosminski, the fact of the identification, and the line that has haunted the case for 110 years. After this identification, which suspect knew, no other murder of this kind took place in London. In 2014, a businessman named Russell Edwards bought a blood-stained shawl at auction. It was supposedly recovered from the body of Catherine Eddowes by a constable who took it home as a souvenir. Edwards had it DNA tested. The result, he announced, matched a living descendant of Ann Kosminski. In 2019, a peer-reviewed paper said the same. Then the scientists read the paper. The shawl had been handled by dozens of people across 130 years. There was no chain of custody. The genetic marker matched is shared by millions of European men. The match was, in scientific terms, meaningless. So we are left with this. The forensic evidence is garbage. The witness ID is 137 years old. The chain of custody is broken. By any modern standard, you could not convict Ann Kosminski of stealing a loaf of bread on what we have. But the two men running the manhunt in real time, who read every file we have since lost, both wrote the same name in private. A mentally ill Polish barber who lived 3 streets from the murders, identified by a witness who walked away. Committed to an asylum the moment the killings stopped. Never released. That is either the answer, or it is the most extraordinary coincidence in the history of British crime. So tell me, do you trust the Victorian detectives who were actually there, or the modern science that says we will never really know?